I'm going to have a little autobiography, and then I'm going to talk more about the Republic. Uh, I started out when I was in ninth grade. We had to write a paper on what we wanted to do as a career in life, and I wrote that I wanted to be a teacher. And by the time that I graduated and went off to college, that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a high school teacher. And so, and then after trying out different things, I decided that I would be an English teacher in high school. I went off to the Army, came back, got a master's in English, but I found that I had to be a high school teacher. I had to take a whole year of Mickey Mouse education courses, and I didn't want to waste my time doing that. So I became by default a college English teacher.
That's
I
how
did
that
that
works.
for a couple of years, and then I realized didn't want to do a PhD in English, the sort of thing that people did were required to do that day. Take some insignificant writer who had never been had a biography and do that. I had a colleague actually who had almost finished his PhD, and then somebody else had written that PhD and got it published. And the Northwestern people said he had to start all over. So I didn't want to go through that. Fortunately, in our freshman English class where I taught down at Stetson University in Florida, we included the Apology by Plato, and my second year, the local great books leader went off to Beirut and asked me to replace him. And so I read a little bit more of Plato and Aristotle, and I thought, that's what I should be doing. I should switch to philosophy. So I applied to a number of places, got accepted at a few, went to one. I got accepted in spite of my only having taken two philosophy courses. And as I told you, I think I told you all in this group, I certainly did in others, that my first course in philosophy was formal and informal logic, taught by a very famous philosopher who gave very boring lectures. And I think I quit going about halfway through. And the night before the exam, for the first time in my life, I drank a beer. And then prodded on by my roommates, I drank a second and a third, and I got drunk. And so the next morning, I had to take the final exam, a 3-hour exam. By 2 hours, I had exhausted everything I knew. And the professor kindly gave me a C minus, which is like getting an F. Uh, and and then I had one other course in Enlightenment philosophers, but I don't think I ever had written a paper in philosophy. In fact, when a number of schools required that I send them a philosophy paper to get into a graduate program in philosophy, and I didn't have a philosophy paper. The closest that I had, I'd written a paper on the drama poem by Matthew Arnold called Empedocles at Etna, where Empedocles, a philosopher before Socrates' time, jumps into Edna and commits suicide. and that was my paper. But fortunately, I had some prestigious degrees and some very good recommendations. And so I got in on a kind of probationary status. In fact, I was required by the chairman to audit the history of philosophy for 2 years to make up for my background. So that's what I did. Anyway, at that point, I was 28 years old. And I'm saying all this because I was late, very late coming to philosophy, but I want to tell all of you encouragingly that you are all late coming to philosophy, but we are never too late to come to philosophy. So that's my little sermon and autobiography at the beginning. Now to the Republic. I want to talk because as a member of this group, I slogged through the reading for today. It was so difficult compared to what we had been doing before. Before we were playing this neat little game of building up this community. And that was kind of fun and relatively easy, but not the reading for today up to the allegory in the cave. And so after I read that, I stopped and I thought, it's kind of funny that Socrates doesn't talk very much about the people in the third level, the workers. He does talk about there being good doctors and bad doctors, and good dyers of cloth, and bad dyers. I don't remember if he talks about good shoemakers and bad shoemakers, but anyway, you get the point. But he never comes back to that to talk about the people at the third level. He pays very little attention because he wants to get on to the auxiliaries and then to the people at the top level. So I thought, well, what happens to the people at the third level who are not good, whatever they are? Are they just sloughed off? Do they disappear? Because you would think that in this society that he's making up in this game, we will only have good shoemakers and good doctors and good tool makers and good farmers. So that's a kind of funny thing that I thought about. And then I thought about, well, what is it that makes a good doctor and a good plumber and so on? And I thought, well, there are two things that are involved. Well, one is they've got to be good at their whatever they do, and to be good, they have to have knowledge. So goodness and knowledge are connected in that third level. So we have good plumbers and good doctors and good shoemakers and so on. Now, then I thought, well, I thought then about the knowledge that these people have to have. To be a good plumber, then you have to know about plumbing. Now, the Romans advanced plumbing by quite a bit. They had a lot of very good ideas and devised some very good plumbing systems. But unfortunately, they did this in lead. And as a result, they didn't live very long. The lead affected the length of their lives. Doctors, as you may remember about the story about Washington when he was ill, what did they do? They bled him because that was how to be a good doctor in those days. They put those little suckers on them to suck out the blood. And so what I thought about was that in all those fields, knowledge changes. Doctors no longer bleed people, they do other things. And in fact, every year, research comes out for them to do still new things. So to become a good doctor, you've got to keep up on the research. And the knowledge is always they're in kind of in flux. Think of the plumbers. They then got plumbing made out of steel, and then they have plumbing made out of plastic. And so they've got to learn about all the new plastic devices when they do plumbing. And now we know how awful plumbing is for our environment. So something new has got to come along, and we don't know yet what that is. So, so there is this connection between being good and having knowledge, but being good at something at the third level means being good about something that is always, always, what's the word I want? Always open to change. Now, when we get to the second level, the auxiliaries have a very specialized thing to become very good auxiliaries. And that's very, very clear. They've got to be very good soldiers. And even to be a very good soldier, even that's subject to change now. You know, you go from spears and daggers and things like that to guns. And then you go to, alas, the atomic bomb and missiles and so on. And that's always open to change. So then you go to the top level. And the top level, the community leaders, the community philosophers, and you remember that there doesn't have to be just one, it could be a committee. In fact, it ends up being a sort of committee that takes turns in the game that Socrates plays. So they have to be good too, but what kind of goodness do they have to have? They have to be good people. Now, none of the others have to be good people. A good friend of mine told me the other day about a fellow he knew in graduate school who went on to get a Nobel degree. My friend said he was a very nasty person. Those were his words. And he remained a very nasty person. And yet he got a Nobel degree. So you don't have to be a good person to have that sort of success. A mark of the goodness of my friend is that my friend didn't tell me the name of this person. My friend does not gossip. Now, a lot of people who know a Nobel Prize winner would say, oh, yes, I know that person, blah, blah, blah. And we see a lot of gossip today. We're kind of bombarded. But a good person, like my friend, does not gossip. Anyway, back to these people who are at the top. They have to be good persons, and in order to be good persons, they have to know what real goodness is. What kind of goodness is unchanging? And so that's what this whole republic is all about. He goes through all these different stages, including the first one that he doesn't really write a whole lot about, to get to the point where we're hoping to have good people leading the community, and they have to know what goodness is. So I hope that that's helpful to you, that helps you to get through this kind of slogging part, because, and then we're going to go on to slog some more, but I wanted to help you to see how Socrates, and Plato, of course, how Socrates gets to this point. Good people who know what goodness is, real goodness, unchanging. Okay, that's the longest I've spoken. I hope it doesn't happen again. But I hope that's helpful.
Very helpful.
So the floor is yours.
Well, I don't think that you can live in a cave and know what goodness is.
Say that again, Lucy.
I think it must be hard to talk about the cave analogy.
Yes.
That I don't know that anybody living in the cave mentality
Yeah.
can know real goodness. Maybe, I don't know. It's hard to talk
Okay.
about.
But in the cave analogy, one person at least escapes and gets up and sees the sun and gets blinded by it and so on, but eventually does see the good, according to the analogy.
Because he's out of the cave.
Yeah, because he's out of the cave.
But let's go back to the impetus. They're down in the cave. They're see what they see. And there's this one, hopefully more, who is curious or impelled interiorly to take a step towards light, say. And so there's allusions, or there's certain language in the text where there's Plato or seems to recognize that there's in certain individuals an innate quality that makes them take that step towards light and go up the cave towards it, whereas others are either satisfied, comfortable, and with the images that they see before them. And so there's a couple of things that, going back to what you said about, the third level or the first level, the plumbers, there's also some language in there about the character of the community. And query, that's the vox populi, so to speak, that is looked at as a whole, but not, as you're suggesting, as an individual. Query, what is this plumber? He knows his job well. Perhaps he keeps taking continuing education programs. He updates himself, but he sticks with his knowledge function. Anyway, towards the greater light allegory of the cave type thing, somebody drops the technical knowledge criteria and steps towards greater knowledge of whatever it is that the cave may lead towards. Mm-hmm. So there's something fundamental that Plato, Socrates seems to acknowledge as being an inborn quality that impels that first step up the hill.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some people have noticed that before, but yes, yeah. And also, Socrates has already said and goes on to say quite often, and Lucy pointed this out, and some of the rest of you too, there are very few of these who are going to get up to the top. Not many do. And so it seems to be, as Charlie is suggesting, it seems to be that there are some people who have that kind of curiosity built into them. And then among those people, there are some who continue to want to satisfy that curiosity. And so they kind of learn more and more and go on to study more and more. They don't necessarily have to get PhDs in philosophy. They don't necessarily have to get PhDs in anything. They just have to have that curiosity that leads them to wonder about life and to wonder about the society that they live in, and to wonder about themselves and say, gee, what's my life like, and where am I heading? What do I want to do? And so there is a kind of self-selection, but there also is as Charlie suggests, some people are lucky that they are born with some of this, and then a whole lot of people are not, and we kind of know that. You know, we look around us and we know that there are these distinctions that we make.
I think
What-
it's a calling. I kept thinking about the Buddhist concept of bodhisattva, a person whose whole purpose in life is to attain enlightenment, and not only that, but bring enlightenment to all sentient beings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kept coming to me as I was reading this.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting analogy, isn't it? That it goes across the thinking of people in all different cultures, and you know, there in Socrates' time, what's going on in China and India and so on? Confucius and the Buddha, and you know, all the, so that it's not just the Western world, it's any developed civilization.
You know, they're I'm sorry, please.
Go ahead, Ron.
Anyway, there are two dynamics at work in the cave, and before that, in the more discursive dialogues that we work through more laboriously. One has to do with the ascension toward the good, toward discovery, self-fulfillment, knowledge, which is possessed and captured by an individual. And then there's the downward thrust, the obligation, the vocation, as it were, to translate what has been gained by the individual back to the community.
Yes.
Obligation to assume a position of leadership, of enlightened informer. We see this clearly and starkly in the fable of the cave, but it runs through the entire republic. There is this upward draft and this downward need for people who have discovered the good and understand the forms of what is true and perpetually true, to translate that into works, into a political context, to put their knowledge basically to work in behalf of the community.
Yeah. Okay. Very. I appreciate that. It's a two-way thing. It's not just to be a good person, but it's also to use that, the knowledge that you have, to be good, to provide good things for your community. Now, that doesn't mean you've got to be the president. You know, you've got, think of that as a community, because that's the word really that Socrates is talking about. He's not talking about a political state. At least I would argue that. You know, other people have said, no, that's what the whole thing is about. And those people have that, what I call, misreading of the sort that Richard had faced with the class that he had that wasn't taught by me. Although I probably would have said the same thing back in those days. Because I'm not familiar with this work. I last read it over 50 years ago. I haven't read it since, and I haven't taught. This is the first time that I've taught the Republic, and so I'm learning. I mean, and I'm excited about it. This is a wonderful dialogue, and I never appreciated that before. But so I think that he's talking about the community, not necessarily a political organization. And what Ron says is quite right. Then there is an obligation to do things for your community, and one can think of that as simply being very local. Doing things for some group that you belong to, doing things for your town. If you got the wherewithal, doing things for your state, or if you got even more wherewithal, doing things for your country. Ask not what you can do, that whole slogan of JFK. Ask what you can do for your country, not what the country can do for you. And capture that very Platonic statement of JFK.
Another aspect of this ascension and subsequent descent has to do with its difficulty and its challenge. So seeing the sun, seeing the light, seeing what's true is difficult for the senses. It's difficult on the eyes. It's difficult for the individual to adjust. It's painful. It is not easy. And then to turn around and descend into the darkness and to deliver the wisdom that's been gained in the sunlight into a dark place, again, full of shadows and people who have not been initiated and who are naive in an innocent way, turns out to be almost as difficult. And indeed, at some point in that parable, Plato makes the point that it can even be life-threatening.
Yeah.
That the people that you're trying to deliver the message to don't just turn away, but they feel individually threatened and undercut in their own authenticity and their own stasis and their own comfortable position in the back of the cave, to the extent that they're prepared to attack the person who tries to bring change, who tries to deliver the knowledge.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
They actually
Yeah.
kill Socrates.
Right. It's not.
So,
This is an illusion. This is not an illusion.
well,
I somewhat read, I've been doing a lot of reading about this as well as reading it. And one writer said, isn't it amazing how prescient, Prescient, how prescient Plato was in writing this, because down the road, Socrates is put on trial and put to death. Well, prescient, my goodness, he wrote this, 20 years after Socrates died. So there are intelligent people who do some misreading of the Republic.
well, it is an allegory, and I don't think, which isn't literal truth. Things stand for other things. I read it in such a way that the individual who went back down into the cave stands for Socrates, and he was killed. And I also was impressed with Plato's knowledge of psychology, in a sense, not to make this too modern a discussion, but people don't like to be told things. People don't like to have you tell them, do this, do that. So the whole approach of the dialogues is questioning. Get the person to come to the position on their own. And to go down into the cave and just say, do this, do that, would be unpopular, whether it's the truth or not. I think that Plato picked up a very interesting point about human psychology. He knew people don't like to be told what to do. And so his whole structure of the learning is through the dialogues.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Right here.
Ever since I first encountered the cave and was told what a great allegory this was, it's never seemed that to me. and maybe these are just, maybe I'm being too literal here. Did anybody watch any of the little animations?
Yeah.
Yes.
Uh, isn't it a problem that the people in the cave are always presented as, basically, tied to a chair and just automatons, basically, zombies, and there seems nothing nothing appealing about that in the least. How could they be satisfied being in that kind of in that kind of situation? So that strikes me as a problem in using this to kind of move into the story of how somebody becomes enlightened and then comes back. Another problem I have is, all right, you go out and you see the sun, and you get a sense of what's going on out there, and you think that you have found some sort of truth that had previously eluded you because of your circumstances. What if you're wrong? You have the impulse to tell the others about the good, but what if you haven't discovered the good? What if what you have discovered is illusory or is confused? There are plenty of people who want to, as we say, give back to their community because they think they've got the answers, and they don't. They don't, or at least what we can say is that there are many different answers that people think are constitute the good. I don't think I'm being a relativist here, and I'm not saying there isn't a good at the moment. I'm not saying that, but I am suggesting that there are perhaps many truths that people discover and take as an insight into the good, and then try to share that may or may not do the others back in the cave any real good.
Well, I
But
think it's more
I'm sorry.
about shining light and enabling people to step out of their conditioning.
And find their own way.
Think differently.
But the allegory says, Richard, the allegory asserts that these men or women who come out actually see the good.
Yes.
So you can't
Do
say, if you say what they see isn't actually the good, or it's the good only for them, then you're writing a different allegory.
But maybe the good is that there are many goods, that there's no one answer, and therefore Socrates goes back down and uses the dialogue not to preach one message, but rather to encourage the individual to think it through and to ask questions over and over again more deeply towards some truth, some self-good that is perceived. And therefore, I agree with whoever it was that pedagogically, psychologically, going back down in the form of dialogue and question Q&A was really, really, really useful. But also because perhaps Socrates recognized there were, as Richard says, many goods out there.
So can you
think
narrate for us? Excuse me.
I don't think does Socrates believe there are many goods?
Yeah. No, not many.
No.
Well, one of the nice things about this dialogue is that the good that's been discovered in the sunlight is unspecified. It's a concept that's not well defined. It's
Right.
not operational. It's not specific. It's not a particular kind of good. It's it's good in general. It's the Platonic version of what can be discovered through a dialectical and truly curious and intellectually ambitious process of ascension and knowledge gleaning over a life's course.
Yeah.
It's that sort of not exactly vacuous, but unspecified good that the that the agency of discovering it brings back down. It's the challenge of discovering something which is more and greater and better than what exists in the darkness.
Okay.
So even if there's not specificity here, I don't see that as a problem. I mean, there's lots of specificity with regard to modes of governance, et cetera, subsequently, but not in this allegory.
Now, even at the very end, it's typical of the Platonic dialogues that almost all, except way at the end, the laws, they end up without the answer. Those of you who took the Meno course, were frustrated because what is virtue? And we get a lot of interesting things about what virtue is not, but we never discover what virtue is. And even here, although there's much more specificity, you know what I'm trying to say, specificity about how to get there, we still don't get as Ron said, it's left kind of vague. Let me just put in by way of information that I know that the eternal things are few in number. They are the good, they are the beautiful, and the good is beautiful, and the beautiful is good, and they are equality and difference. I'm trying to think. Anyway, maybe half a dozen, fewer than 10, I would say. Now, there's a kind of funny thing when Plato
Is
talks.
this your list, or is this Plato's list of
Plato's list?
Okay.
Yeah, Plato's list. He
All
does unfortunately talk about the perfect chair or table or something like that, and that's unfortunate because if you go in that direction, then you have to have the perfect airplane, which never existed, of course, in his time. He couldn't even think about it. The perfect airborne missile and so on. You would just have thousands of perfect things. And we can get that with Aristotle, but we don't get that really with Plato. He really talks only about these half a dozen different things, and they all kind of mix in with each other. The goodness is the same as beauty in some ways, but it's also different. But it's also good.
The Forest is knowledge on that list?
Knowledge is sort of the dynamic by how we get there.
Okay.
So knowledge is kind of the in-between. Knowledge is, rather than make it a noun, we should, though he uses the noun, but if you think of it as a verb or a verbal, this is us and we are knowing X, we are knowing Y. So knowing is a kind of relationship between the individual and the thing that is known.
And where I'm going back to your class on the symposium. Is love also on that list?
That's in the relationship, yes.
That's in the
If you know what good is, you love good.
You love
If you
good.
know
Okay.
what beauty is, you love beauty. So loving is like knowing.
Okay.
Is that
It's-
helpful?
It seems like he points to this realm, which is beyond earthly existence. And there's light that shines from that realm into our human existence, that is only seen by a few. And everything in the human existence is just like a shadow, like it's made in the image of these pure things, but it's never pure because it's this human existence. It exists in in the muck and the mire and all of that.
Yeah, yeah. I
So
remember when
can you
when
hear
I-
me?
what? Excuse me.
Can you hear me?
Oh yes, there you are, Tony. Okay,
I figured it out.
okay.
I've wanted to mention that I get bogged down in the cave allegory, because at what point do those who are in the cave enter the cave? And is he referring to the cave, those in the cave in general, just those who are bogged down by the shadows? Or is this the cave that you enter at birth until you are enlightened? Or is the cave those who have bad shadows in their head only? And if those are already grown up people, or if the cave is maybe talking about metaphysics. And if you talk about science, some shadows are created by the biological makeup of the brain, because, for example, those who have mental illness have no control over the good and the bad, and so you can't really bring them out into the sun because they're physically unable to see the light.
Yeah.
So I get bogged down in this, and if indeed it is something that people are born into the cave, then why is it that the shadows have to be dark? Why can't they be born into, as you say, wisdom and light, and already have a conscience of what is right and what is wrong? And these kind of things boggle my mind, because I have to have some relation to who it is that's in the cave. And are these people who have been in bad places already grown up, or are these people who are born with it and are already in there? Or is Socrates referring to, in general, anyone who is in the cave?
Okay, let's see if we can unboggle.
Right.
I think it's a bit like what Richard was doing earlier, wanting to inject questions about this allegory that are, I don't mean this to sound derogatory, but that are not relevant. It's true that if you think about people down there being chained, if you think too much about that, you wonder, well, what kind of childhood did they have before they were chained? And how long is this going to last? Are they going to finally die in their chains, be all choked up, and there they go? No, we've just got to accept that these are living adults, however they got there, and wherever they're going to go, they're living adults at present, chained and forced to only look straight ahead. And don't go beyond that. Just that's the way they are. Don't ask about how they got there, because that's not relevant.
And we look at it
I
as
know
a
that. I know
metaphor.
that's hard. That's hard to do.
But
it's hard to kind of
Do a philosophy course. We're
Go
supposed
ahead.
to be
What?
question everything. Yes.
Well, I mean, one of the questions you can ask is, who are the people who are creating the shadows? You
Yeah,
have
exactly.
a whole
Right.
group of people that are holding up these forms that create the shadows.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Who are those people?
Might the shadows could be just the flickers of the flame. I think I see it as all of us can be prisoners to what we see or think we see,
Right.
or what we don't
Right.
see.
I get
But
Sure.
some can grow out of that while others can't.
Right.
I think in some of the earlier material before the allegory of the cave, Plato speaks to that issue. He enlightens and provides some insight into in response to your question. He describes, the selection process for sorting people into their metallic orders. It sounded pretty heavy-handed and a little bit like eugenics to me. But anyway, there's a process of sorting people out and discovering how to improve the innate capacities and capabilities of individuals, their ability to receive and understand the good. So high potential people marry other high potential people, or at least they have children by them. And that process goes on in a kind of directed way, maybe by the same people that create the shadows in the cave. And then there's another step. That first one isn't sufficient, and that has to do with the educational system and its multiplication of and full exploration, efflorescence of these innate capabilities. So it involves poetry and the appropriate kind of poetry and gymnastics and whatnot. And it's ongoing, and people are elevated from one level of capacity to another. But all of this is extremely tenuous, as he points out in a subsequent section. And the prospect that it will work out is extremely uncertain. A lot of social pressures, there are a lot of temptations, there are a lot of things that happen in a community collectively to defeat the process of individual enlightenment. And I think that description of sort of the sociology of knowledge and of its relationship to the individual psychology of fulfillment and enlightenment sets the stage in prior parts of this dialogue for what's presented in the allegory of the cave.
Okay, I think, yes, what Ron points out is really relevant to the next part that we're going to read, which is a lot about education. And so Plato writes a lot about education as being crucial to the development of any of us to the point where we can think more and more, we can more and more satisfy our curiosity. Going back to Tony, Socrates seems to recognize that there are some people that are just born that not unable to do it with mental illness of some extreme sort as being something that we all know about, that there are people who just are born without that capacity, unfortunately. And then there are a lot of people who are born with the capacity but don't get educated. And so there's a kind of filtering out about all of this. And as Margot said, that maybe there's there's been a question is being raised about what we think is real and what actually is. I must tell you just one other story about my funny introduction to philosophy. After I got accepted into graduate school, the graduate students, all of whom were younger than I, went for coffee at the cafeteria next door to the building where we had our classes and our places where we could read and write, our carols, I guess they were called. Anyway, in one of the early days, maybe the first day of having coffee, we were sitting around a table, and some bright young guy who had majored in philosophy as an undergraduate said, we were sitting there drinking coffee, and he said, well, how do we know that this is coffee in here? And I thought, that's crazy. But I pursued it. I think I did. I think I said, well, we'll go out in the cafeteria and we'll see how the coffee is made. And he said, well, what if they're making something that tastes like coffee but isn't really coffee? And then I said, well, you could look at the bag that the stuff is in. Well, you could go on, go to the factory and on and on and on. And I thought, oh, these people are nuts. And I continue to think that that's a kind of unreal question. And then later, I think that same day, I used the word idea in a conversation, and another graduate student kind of leaped at me practically, and he said, well, what do you mean by idea? And I said, I just mean idea. And he said, well, do you mean Plato's idea? Or do you mean Descartes' idea? Or do you mean Hume's idea? Well, I didn't know I didn't know what he meant. Now I do, of course, but again, that's how you can come to philosophy very late, as all of you are doing.
I would have enrolled in plumbing school, I think, at the end of that day.
So Forrest, my daughter presented a question to me a couple of weeks ago. She said, Mom, do we all see red the same way? I mean, we see red is red, but is that what's filtering through our brain? You may see a red and I may see a red, but your red may be different from my red.
Right.
And that's the same as the coffee.
Yeah. And some people are colorblind, we know.
And then there are those that are colorblind, but she said she wasn't referring to those. She said, no, this is just normal vision. What you're seeing as red may not be what I'm seeing as red.
But Forrest,
there's no way for us to tell, is there?
Forrest, don't you think that's an extremely relevant question right now in this day and age with our media and our news? And how do you know what you know and when you think you know it?
Yeah, very. Yeah.
And it's never been more profound. How do you know? I mean, it's one thing to say, is this really coffee? But reality is a steak these days,
Right. Right. Well, let's not go into particulars about that, but yes.
I just think it's a tremendously relevant question that
it is.
But I have another question though about the, you said there was a problem with Plato's form theory because at his time an airplane was never invented. So how could there be a form of an airplane? But would Plato say that the form of a plane existed, mankind just had not discovered it yet?
Yeah, that's why I kind of wanted to stop our going there, because that would be incomprehensible. So the fact that there's no way that we can imagine Socrates imagining an airplane, that must be the same about chairs and tables and dogs and cats and everything, every object that we perceive. There can't be forms for all of those things. There can't be ideas in that funny sense that Plato uses for the idea. That's why I have wanted to tell you in advance that the number of ideas or things that can be known are very few. Goodness, beauty, difference, sameness, and so on. And let me just go back again to pick up on Ron talking about education. Most people, if they're in a community that's relatively developed, most people are lucky enough to go to elementary school. And in elementary school, they learn mathematics, 2 + 2 = 4, and so on. And then, let's see, if they get to junior high school, they learn geometry, and they learn to draw triangles and squares and so on. And at some point, they come to learn that there is such a thing as a perfect triangle, which we never see. There is such a thing as a perfect square that we never see. A square is a four-sided figure with lines that touch each other with 90-degree angles at each of the four corners, or something like that, you know. And we can draw a square, but that's not a perfect square, because the distance between 2 points is a line, but we can never draw a perfect line. We can draw a line, but that's, if you look under a microscope, that has a lot of little drops from the chalk or the pencil or the graphite. So it's a thing that we can think about, but we cannot actually see with our eyes. We can see representations of squares and triangles, but we can't see the perfect square or the perfect triangle. And so mathematics and geometry turn out to be very important in the scheme of education as a step toward understanding what abstract things are.
Yeah.
Does that include that there is such a thing as a perfect square or triangle, but that most attempts at representing it are simply just that?
Yes.
So
exactly.
So it's interesting because it's almost, again, paradoxical. The theoretical is the real, and what we think is real is a cheap imitation.
Yeah, not a cheap one, but an imitation.
An imitation.
Yeah, let's keep out value judgment.
Okay.
Out of that, yeah, an imitation, yeah. And that's what Plato will go on to say. These are all imitations.
What's fascinating is that you know, our most advanced sciences today still have this this interactive and shall I say mutual relationship between advanced mathematics and empirical science.
Yes.
So there's a play back and forth, if you will, between what's real in a much more advanced state. I mean, it's not sensual. It's not accessible simply through our nose and eyes and whatnot, but maybe it can be detected with very complicated technologies and measured. And the mathematics that provides the superstructure, the understanding and explanation of the phenomenon themselves. So there are two levels of reality that we work in. Neither one of them is accessible as the kind of realities that Plato was discussing here. Both of them more elevated and both of them much more complicated than the realities he was dealing with. But still separate and in a sense still hierarchical.
Yeah. In a sense, where you bring in science, you can say that sometimes science advances by thinkers first apprehending something that they cannot verify experimentally. People thought about there being neurons before they had the equipment to say, oh yeah, those are then turn out to be real. Einstein thought E equals mc squared, and there was no way at first that that could ever be verified. And it couldn't be verified until they could set up an experiment and find that when the rays of the sun went around the moon or whatever, I forget the details of it, but they finally verified E equals mc squared. But it didn't start out that way. It started out as a brilliant thought by Einstein. So sometimes things go in the direction of thought to experiment, not experiment to thought. Kind of amazing.
We're speechless. Yes.
Yeah.
No, you're not. You're
Well,
thinking.
another example is
You're thinking.
this God particle, the the particle that that manifests the phenomenon of gravity, which was determined to exist through mathematical manipulation and
Yes.
hypotheses. And
Higgs
it
boson.
exactly
Yeah. What was that called?
Higgs boson.
What's that?
Higgs
Higgs
Yes.
boson.
Yeah.
boson.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was the scientist who developed the field theory was named Higgs.
Yeah.
That deducted the existence of this particle.
Yeah. Yeah. Another nice example.
Even more abstract and more removed from our everyday experience.
Yes. Very.
Yes.
Anyway,
So I find myself gravitating, going back to the cave and so forth, was that the qualities, imprecise as they are in flux, that accept what goodness is or what any representation of a thing might be. So I find myself saying that the quality that we are, that Socrates is having us look for, which is a willingness to reflect thoughtfully. And then I found myself writing, query, what does that mean? If goodness is a willingness to reflect thoughtfully, isn't it to be Socratic? That is, to keep questioning and keep the mind open. And while that's a never fixed point, because things are always in flux, no matter whether it's scientific or whether it's value-based. And therefore, the quality that he's seeking for in terms of goodness, et cetera, is a process of being Socratic. And anyway, that's where I'm stumbling towards.
I think it relates to the kind of problem that that a few of you raised before about what is knowledge, and my arguing that knowledge is the kind of go-between. So knowledge isn't something that we know. Knowledge is the knowing of something.
Well, it's kind of the activity of turning. I know, the turning and looking. It is sort of an action of learning is an action.
Yeah. And one of the things that's missing in this allegory is that that Plato and Socrates before him, his mentor, they believe that you get there by having conversation with other seekers. So you don't do it all by yourself. And you know, the allegory of the cave makes it seem like you do it all by yourself.
Mm.
But again and again, what Plato does is he writes dialogues, except for this one, which is a monologue, but monologue about a dialogue. So the way that you get it is you are lucky enough to find some other seekers that you can get together with, the way we are getting together here and thinking out things that we couldn't do by ourselves. You know, I couldn't have gotten to this insight that I told you about without our having had our conversations from the first day. And so I've gained, as each of you have gained, by this being a conversation, not just each of us going off and reading the Republic all by ourselves. We never could have done it without each other.
Agreed.
Right.
And throughout the course, this is week 3, I have found so many things that I am applying the cave to. You know, for anybody that has children or grandchildren, and you're trying to teach them something about life, you can't do it, but you cannot do it by telling them what you know. You know, this is shining a different light on lots of things, including global warming. And, you know, seeking the truth about things and what you cannot teach those cave dwellers. You can't teach them this stuff. They have to find it somehow. So it's just brought me to a different place.
Well,
They don't think they have to find it. The cave dwellers that you're referring to. When you say they have to seek it somewhere, some are closed-minded to seeing the light.
I think motivation comes into play a lot here. We really haven't talked about that, but it's like, what is the motivation? I think the highest motivation he points to is the motivation toward truth or light. But if you're motivated to just do, like, make money or get ahead in this human existence, that's not going to get anybody anywhere.
Right.
Does Socrates in Plato's depiction come across as someone who is actually learning from others?
Discussion.
The way we're learning from each other.
He's certainly searching, but that's a good question. You always, it's hard not to think, oh, he's just bugging these people. He's bugging the other people to kind of do the searching, but he's not really searching himself. That's your point.
My point is that he ends up where he wants to be, even if he defines that as an incomplete answer. He knows where he's going, it would seem, and he knows how to get there. And in that sense, it doesn't seem to me to be well. You know, we've all seen this, you know, before. It's not a conversation in the sense of sharing and helping each other reach a common understanding or a new understanding. It's a performance, I'm really struck. It seems to me that the dialogue form here is only serving the purpose of breaking up the argument into digestible pieces for us, for the audience. it's just a way of saying, are you with me? Okay, now we can move to the next point. Because certainly the people who are dialoguing with Socrates are bringing very little to the table.
Yeah. Glaucon just agrees. I mean, he does nothing in this
Right.
dialogue. Say, yeah, you're right.
Right.
Well, no, Thrasymachus challenges him again and again. And even Glaucon and Ade Iminus, even they sometimes say, "Oh no, you're wrong. I wasn't going there," or whatever. But there is a whole lot of yes, you're right. Oh yeah. Oh, I understand. Oh, okay.
There's what occasionally one of them will say, I don't understand that point.
Yes.
Could you clarify that point?
Yeah.
And of course, again, that's just a kind of presentational feature that allows Plato to unpack a very complicated point and to try to present it in a couple of different ways for the benefit of the listener or the reader.
But then he can say then when he says that to Socrates, in many instances, he says that he wants Socrates to clarify that. And Socrates says, "Oh, but you've put me in a difficult position because I was hoping I wouldn't have to do this because I don't want to have to sustain the complaints of everyone for taking such a position."
Sure.
So it does go back and forth.
Yeah.
But I would also like to add that I find that this is easier for men to read in many cases, such as on page 161 of chapter 7, Socrates says, men may be better at most things. And I thought for sure he was going to say, men may be better at some things. But he says, he clarifies and he says, men may be better at most things, but this does not mean they have exclusive rights to those things. In other words, even though we're better, women can try it out and see what they come up with.
Yeah, that's why I think that Waterfield says that Plato is no feminist,
Yeah.
even though he has women being guardians and women being doctors, and by extension, women could be plumbers and all those things. But women couldn't lift things as heavy as men can, which of course is false. It all depends on the woman and the man that you're comparing. So there are many places where we would want him to say men and women, but he doesn't.
And not necessarily most things, because it doesn't necessarily have to be physical. Clearly, the male mind and the female mind work differently in approaching many aspects of life. Yeah. And the women might have a better handle on how to approach certain things and be better at it, whereas the men might look at things differently and go about it in a less productive way, so that women can do better.
Yeah. Let me go back to Richard's question, because I just had a thought that I have never had before. So what is Socrates learning in this whole process? And I think Richard rightly says it's not clear that he's learning anything. And then I thought, but Plato is learning. Plato is writing these dialogues, and he doesn't just write little speeches that he's going to give. He's not going to write the kind of things that most philosophers write. He's writing dialogues, and suddenly I realize that by the time that we get to the Republic, we are thinking already differently than when we read the Apology. Whether you've read it or not doesn't matter. Take it for granted that in the Apology, maybe the first dialogue that Plato wrote, we don't get much of a hint of what Socrates was about. We get a hint, yeah, but not a whole lot more. But as Plato writes these dialogues, he develops his own thinking in a way that he couldn't have, maybe, if he just wrote the way philosophers typically write. By writing dialogues, he makes himself question this point and question that point until his own thinking gets more and more refined as he moves toward trying to understand what true knowledge is all about and what are the objects of true knowledge.
I remember one of the admonitions you gave us at the beginning of this whole process, one of the directions you lent us, which was read the first book as a narrative, as a simple interplay between different personalities with different orientations and different interests that converged, and understand the dynamics of those interactions as if they were part of a novel, part of a short story, whatever. And indeed, I think if you step back and you consider the characters, which become increasingly vivid through the subsequent books, and of course the character of Socrates himself, these are the chess pieces that Plato's using to array his own grand narrative. It's not unlike a very, very good novel where you have people who are searching for truth and try to speak truth, but in the process find their own shortcomings, test the validity of their own values, interact with other people to refine and sharpen and improve. I mean, this is a demonstration of dialectical learning in process, and it may well be that it is not fully contested, the truth that's being presented. But again, I don't think that the character of Socrates attempts to go to places where he's not confident. He is trying to operate within his own realm, within the character that's been outlined by Plato. He doesn't tell us what the truth is or the good because he doesn't know, or he can't. It exceeds his capacity to translate into text, and there are other limitations that he acknowledges. So, I mean, I think the fact that he has a point of view, the fact that he's willing to subject his point of view to testability and contention through dialogue with others who have very different points of view is not a negative thing. I think it's part of this art form. It's part of this dialectical narrative that's being rolled out. It's quite wonderful. The whole notion of, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to.
Well,
Richard.
Just picking up, we're talking about an art form. I like that term, and it seems to me a very effective way to. Let's assume that Plato did not have these ideas in his head full blown, but rather he discovered them or perfected them as he wrote, and that the dialogue, in a sense, may reflect his own questioning and interim steps that he takes on the way toward a grander understanding of something, a more complete understanding. Not having read a lot of formal philosophy, I wonder why this approach, or maybe I should say, has this approach been used by other philosophers?
Well, I can answer that.
Yeah.
There are not many not many other dialogues, but a philosopher named Berkeley, or Berkeley, as the English would say, and he was English. Anyway, Berkeley writes a dialogue, and Hume writes a dialogue.
To say Hume wrote
Hume writes a dialogue called a dialogue. What is it called? Not the dialogue concerning human understanding. Anyway, it's a dialogue in which he has characters arguing about God, the existence of God, or the nature of God, and it's a lovely dialogue to read, and you might like to read it. It's not tough going. It's not a slog, and Hume has the main character saying about different thinking about God. Why wasn't God a committee? Why wasn't God a committee making up the universe and the earth and so on? Or maybe God was just a baby God and hadn't really come to maturity. Or maybe God was an old man, kind of decrepit, and wasn't thinking straight. and so I mean, it's very funny, and of course it ends up being very agnostic about the existence of God. And Hume did not have it published. He kept it secret, except among his best friends. And he ordered that it not be published until after he died. Why? Because he would have been vilified. You know, Hume dies in 1776. One of the few figures that I can remember, because it's the Declaration of Independence also. So Hume died in 1776, when to be an atheist or an agnostic was just like being a Protestant for the Catholics or a Catholic for the Protestants. It was dangerous.
But it was
but very, very few. Those are the only two that I can think of. There are probably a lot of others that are not very good.
Well, I guess Plato's a hard act to follow, but
you might say that.
Plato says at some point that the best way to philosophize is to talk, because when you talk, you are always open to changing your view. But to write things down, there you've made something permanent. And so there's something really awful about writing things down. Plato has Socrates say this. And right. So the best thing to do, best philosophy is talking. The second best is in a written dialogue, which kind of imitates talking.
So Aristotle ignored all of that and simply wrote.
Yeah, well, they think that Aristotle wrote one dialogue, at least, that got lost. So we don't have evidence, but there's some evidence by other people who talk about a dialogue by him. But he ends up also with not very much that's written. Most of what we have from Aristotle is from notes taken by Aristotle's students.
Yeah, his students created the written record of what Aristotle said. Yeah. But I'd like to go back just, Richard questioned, I thought at the beginning, which is a good thing to question, whether or not the allegory is a good allegory or a good story. And I would take the opposite point of view. It's 2,300 years old, and just going on the YouTube, the number of YouTubes there are about it, not to say that is a measure of significance, but it is in a way. I mean, we are still talking about it. You have art theory, Susan Sontag, you have significant people today still addressing the issue of that allegory. I mean, it was extremely powerful in the sense of how many issues he captured with perception and goodness and our obligation to help other people to go back down into the cave. It is so complex, and yet it seems simple in the terms of how long it is, but he raises so many phenomenal issues that are still being raised today. I mean, it's a pretty damn powerful bit of writing.
Yeah, I loved how also they brought the Matrix into it, because I just thought that was great. So perfect.
What do you mean by Matrix?
The movie The Matrix,
Oh,
when they identify Neo as the one who's going to wake everybody up, and they give him a choice. Do you want the red pill or the blue pill? And one of the pills, he'll be able to just complacently go back to the way he's always been living in the illusion. And the other pill, he'll have to see the truth. And once he sees the truth, he can't go back.
You've got to look at Charlie. You've got to look at one of the links that I gave.
Yeah.
When I listed three ones that I thought were worth your watching, and one of them was applying the allegory to the Matrix, the movie, which I have never seen the movie.
Oh,
so,
you got to see it.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what I realized. Yeah. So
But,
Charlie, that was the reference. So you probably haven't looked at it yet.
well,
And then that article that I still haven't finished on AI, where the guy makes the reference to the allegory in the cave. I was just blown away. I was reading it in the sunroom, and I had to come up and write you all a little note. Oh, I just saw another reference to the allegory in the cave.
Thank you. What is remarkable here, just to go back to the suggestion that indeed this is the birth of a very distinctive and very valuable art form, artful philosophy, as it were. The use of this allegory, and I guess there are a couple more, at least one more, makes very complex and complicated ideas very concrete and very visualizable. So this ability to transform dialogue, discourse, philosophical musing in a kind of a discursive way into storytelling, and fairly simple to understand storytelling, is quite a remarkable capacity. And it is it certainly performed here with a magical hand. It's I've read about the allegory of the cave, and it was a pleasure to actually read it twice, and make it my own in a sense, or at least to come closer to it and appreciate it all the more in the process.
Did you find the line as helpful?
Well, I actually did, and I thought that was a great setup for the allegory about the cave.
Okay.
I'd almost forgotten about that. There's so much in here.
Yeah, I must have missed something in that one, because I moved on to the cave and with some relief, because the line left me.
Yeah, I think the line is kind of difficult. That's why I haven't even mentioned it, and I thought we would have plenty enough to talk about with the allegory.
Yep, good choice.
Well, yeah, the interesting thing is, I mean, the line is talks about different levels or different forms of what exists, different ontologies, as it were. And then it talks about how to know them, how to access them. And I mean, maybe the hierarchy that is presented here by Socrates is less compelling than the fact that there are, as demonstrated, as we discussed, by modern science, different levels of reality. And those levels are knowable in different ways. And I mean, if that's a simple-minded takeaway, it's amplified and made concrete and more relevant to politics and community development and a search for wisdom and truth in the allegory of the cave itself. So the two do very different kinds of work, and I granted the one is a little more confusing and maybe less understandable and relevant today, but the concrete example is certainly still relevant and still instructive. And I apologize, I'm blithering here.
Oh, that's okay.
No.
That's okay.
you're
That's what this forum is for.
Hmm.
Isn't it more fun than if you were all by yourself, Ron?
I don't think I would have gotten past the first book without your energetic injection of new ideas and challenging questions. It would have been impossible. I mean, in fact, I tried to read the Republic years and years ago, and I failed miserably. I never. I'm reading that old copy. Unfortunately, it's not quite as well translated, I think, as the one that you may be reading.
Yeah, well, let me just say that the Rob and Wester Waterfield version, to me, one reads, it was the translation I have in hand is 1993. And I found myself laughing out loud because the language sounds like Forest Hansen to me. And I found myself thinking, this is so contemporaneous. It's even he uses, some phrase he talked about the pathway he advocates, I think, towards goodness is being awake. He uses the metaphor of the word being awake. And I thought, it's going to take me where I don't want to go. But
They're fighting words today.
I totally agree with it. I wrote woke over on my margin. Question mark. One of the other thoughts I had that helped me here, somebody, I'm a big fan of the Bayesian theory. Thomas Bayes, who was a rough contemporary of Hume, I believe, posed the question of, is there a God type thing? And he developed this theory that, let's just say there's a 50-50 chance that there is a God, and let's assemble evidence. And he distinguishes between good evidence and bad evidence and so forth. And then he builds, it's a probabilistic approach that's iterative and evergreen and is founded upon ongoing working towards some likelihood. And I feel like it relates to what Socrates is suggesting through his dialogues, which is keep asking, keep seeking, keep looking for better truths, consider the source, work towards it, and you almost never get there. But you may be more likely to be right than you were at the beginning because you've assembled good truths along the way. I love that idea. It's powerful, and I found it relevant to Socrates' process. and I'm conflating that. And so I'm from Missouri originally, the Show Me State, and this course has shown me that the Socratic method, which I once questioned when I was in college, I like Forrest, took a class in the history of philosophy, and after 2 lectures, I thought, no. And I switched it around and took the philosophy of history rather than the history of philosophy. And I love that. and now and later in life, I feel like it's connected to what Socrates and Bayes is suggesting. It's just a process of understanding from truer facts and so forth.
Well, it's the scientific method, essentially.
Right.
You may never get there, but you keep testing what you know against what you're discovering.
Keep exploring.
Yeah.
There's a great story about during the ratification debate in Virginia, Patrick Henry on the one side was arguing against the new Constitution, and James Madison was arguing in favor of it for various and sundry reasons. And John Marshall, I think, is quoted as having said, after listening to Patrick Henry, who spoke like a thunderstorm and was very, very, very persuasive, but little Jimmy Madison, in his versions and responses, was convincing. And the difference between being persuaded and being convinced is, you've shown me enough to convince me. And this class and Plato and our conversations and what I've learned from our collective interplay has been convincing.
I think we should probably stop. We've run over, actually, so making up for lost time. This is wonderful. I'm so excited about what we're doing here, and we're doing it all together. That's what's so lovely. It's kind of groupthink, but not the kind of groupthink that led to the invasion of Cuba. This is
Right.
much better groupthink. So we have one more. It's still going to be a slog. We're over the fun and games, and so we're into difficulty still for next week. But look forward to seeing all of you then.
So what specifically should we be focusing on next week for next week?
I haven't thought about it yet. I've been so involved in what I've been thinking about here. So I'll send something out. I'll send something out about that.
Has anybody noticed that we all look like we're in different rooms of the same house?
Well, there are a lot of book
We
pages.
all
Yeah.
hired the same we all hired the same decorator.
Nice thought.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to bring a bookshelf for the next
Okay.
week.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Okay.